watching Huff Post Live. I'm Caroline Modarressy-Tirani. The YWCA is the nation's oldest and largest multicultural organisation dedicated to eliminating racism and empowering women. Since 2012, Dara Richardson-Heron has served as its CEO, and she's made it her mission to speak out across the country about these issues and promote gender and racial equality. And she joins me now. So Dara, thank you so much for joining us.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
It's so great to have you. And, you know, for those who are non-familiar, I think everyone's familiar with the YWCA, but they might not necessarily know what it really does. So what do you do?
That's right. So our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. We have been a social justice organization for more than 150 years. And that's really why we launched our brand awareness campaign, because people love us, but they don't necessarily know exactly what we do.
So when you talk about social justice, break it down for us. What do you mean?
Well, you know, we are very focused on eliminating racism for all people, ensuring gender equity for women, and also making sure that we all have the opportunity to achieve the American dream that we all hold so dear.
I think that that's, you know, such a great point to dwell on for a second, because the last few months, the last couple of years really, people have been looking at inequality, whether it be, you know, in terms of pay, or whether it be inequality in terms of, does the colour of my skin mean that I'm not going to be able to get that job? Is it going to mean that that police officer is going to stop me and shoot me? You know, these conversations are going on. How do you see the YWCA sort of figuring in all of that?
Well, you know, we have been at the forefront of most civil rights organizations and actions for, you know, gosh, over 150 years. So what we do, we look at interracial profiling. We were very heavily focused on the Interracial Profiling Act. Equal pay. We have always been very focused on making sure that women achieve equal pay for equal work. I mean, we work very, very hard for what we were doing. And the reality is, we are still fighting for things that we shouldn't. Reproductive rights for women. Domestic violence, you may or may not know, but the YWCA is the largest provider of domestic violence services in the nation. We meet women where they are, and we try to make sure that there's an equal playing field for women.
And it's an amazing thing what you guys do, particularly when it comes to domestic violence.
That's right.
Obviously, we just had the Super Bowl this past weekend. Yes. I don't know if you were you, did you have a stake in that game? Were you either way?
You know, I just watched the game.
There you go, that's fine. Me too, me too. You know, it wasn't anyone I care about. But, you know, unfortunately, the sad fact is that, you know, after a big sporting event of that nature, after the Super Bowl, there are more likely to be incidents of domestic violence that occur after the Super Bowl. And so, you know, tell us how the YWCA wants to tackle that kind of issue.
Well, first of all, people say that that's a fact. I'm not sure if that's really myth. The reality is domestic violence happens every day. 1 in 4 women will be impacted by domestic violence. We impact that by, first of all, meeting the needs of women where they are. We make sure that we have the supports and services for them when they are trying to leave. One of the things that we do, very importantly, is making sure that they have financial supports, because that's the #1 reason why women can't leave a domestic violence situation, is because they are faced with the untenable situation of perhaps being homeless. So we make sure that we not only provide a safe space for women, but we also provide them with the tools and resources they need, such as financial empowerment, so they can not only leave, but stay out of that environment.
And, you know, in terms of staying out that environment as well, I think that it's being aware of the horrendous environments that some women are in, that I think campaigns, you know, such as the YWCA's are actually trying to do. They're trying to show people this is how women live, and this is how they shouldn't be, and this is what they should be actually having as opportunities for them.
Yeah, and you know, it's a sad fact that despite the fact that women make significant contributions to the world, and have for hundreds of years, we still don't have our rightful place in society. So at the YWCA, what we do is make sure that women have, first of all, access to child care, so that if they do go out into the work world, they have a place for high quality, affordable child care. We also provide, as we mentioned, a safe haven for women impacted by domestic violence, but also for young women. We make sure that they have the tools and leadership that they need to go out and make a productive use of their time in the world.
So Dara, when you meet these women, obviously, you know, I know you're sort of all over the place. You get all over the place when it comes to the multiple offices that you have around the country. But, you know, when you meet somebody who has utilised the YWCA service and they themselves were a victim to domestic violence, are there stories that stick out to you, something that sort of sticks in your mind?
I have to tell you, we have 225 YWCAs across the nation in 47 states in the District of Columbia. I have now visited about to 70 in my short tenure, but every single time I walk into one of our domestic violence shelters and I see a woman and a child, and they tell me that they walked into our shelter with nothing but the clothes on their backs, that really just hurts me, and it makes me want to fight more and more every day to make sure that women and children and families have what they need so that they don't have to be impacted by domestic violence.
And, you know, I think that there are still so many myths around domestic violence, you know, as you mentioned. What is the one thing you'd want to clear up? If you could, you know, right now, if you could end either a stigma or a myth, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, I think the one thing would be that a lot of people think that domestic violence has to be physical abuse. But the reality is domestic abuse is and can be financial abuse. And some people say, oh, he's not hitting you, you should still stay. The reality is if you don't have financial empowerment, you have to stay in an environment that really you won't be able to thrive, and worse, generations below you won't be able to thrive. So I would say the one thing I would say is financial abuse is very important in a domestic violence situation, and abuse is not just physical.
And if you're somebody who sees either a loved one or maybe a friend and you are concerned for them, you know, what is the YWCA's advice in that situation?
Well, the first thing that you don't do is try to solve the problem for them. You need to have them go to a professional, go to any of our YWCAs across the nation who provide these services, and they can walk you through the steps that have to be taken, because the reality is the most dangerous time for a woman leaving a domestic violence situation is when she is actually trying to get away. So it's very, very important that you have that person talk to a professional about what you need to do. But make the call. Reach out to our YWCAs across the nation. They really have wonderful, wonderful supports and information.
And you don't have to pay for the services?
No, you don't.
So I think that, again, that's another thing, you know, if you're worried about a financial barrier, this idea that you have to pay for kind of a service, I think could be off-putting, so that's a great thing.
Right, and not only do you not have to pay, if it's a YWCA that provides the services, you can come in, you can get temporary shelter, you can get housing, or you can be directed to places where you can, you know, get the services and supports that you need.
So important. Well, you know, you mentioned obviously social justice being at the heart and the soul really of YWCA. Right. Black History Month is upon us. How do you see the two intersecting?
Well, you know, it's a major tenet of our mission is eliminating racism, and certainly Black History Month is an important time. And you know, we at the YWCA see it as important because it's a time where you can talk about all the great things that African Americans do and the contributions that we have made to this world. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about the negative things, and we hear a lot about all the unfortunate events, but this is one time when we can really focus on the highlights, and I think it's a very, very important time in our history. I wish we were at the point where African American history was just, you know, American history. We're not there.
When do you think we'll get there, I guess?
You know, I wish, gosh, if I could answer that question.
I know, you'd be predicting the lottery
tomorrow.
As well.
I wish it were tomorrow, but the reality is, I think we won't get there until people come to terms with the reality that we don't live in a post-racial society, that it is indeed true that racism exists. We have to look at the systems, the institutions, and all of the practices that really allow certain races to be privileged over others.
Well, you know, as a woman of color, you know, when you're going up the ranks in an organization as well, I think that talking about successes, again, you know, you are a huge success story.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
I mean, it's absolutely true, not only because you're a woman of color, but also you're a woman, period. You know, there are very few women who get to the top of organizations in the way that you have. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've overcome, do you think?
I think one of the biggest challenges I have faced is the fact that, you know, as a woman, you have to do so much. You have to be all things to all people. You have to mentor, you have to sponsor, you have to be at the top of your game. I think the expectations are higher for women. That doesn't daunt me. It's just something that I find troubling because I think it could put off some other women who feel like, gosh, you know, I have to do twice as much to get to where I am. But again, when I speak to women, and particularly young women, I tell them, don't let your race or your gender impede you from achieving success. Just move forward. And also, I think another thing that women in leadership sometimes do is just kind of bury their head in the sand. And, you know, as African American women, we've been leaning in long before, you know, leading in was popular. We want to lead. There was a study for the Center for Talent Innovation that talked about women of color who want to lead, but often in organizations we're overlooked or we don't have that sponsor or that mentor. But despite that, you know, women of color and women in general are still leading. So I would say persevere, really persevere.
Well, and I love what you just said about mentorship as well. I mean, you know, for you, was there a mentor that really just helped you to you know, feel like you could get to where you wanted to be?
Well, I think my first leaders and role models were my parents. They led by example. They really, I have 3 sisters, and they told all of us never, again, be limited by your race or your gender. They had high expectations for us, and we have high expectations for ourselves. But sadly, many of the women that we see at the YWCA, they don't have that network that I had. And that's what we try to create at the YWCA. We try to create that cocoon, if you will, that safe space, that environment where there are women, there are men, there are leaders who are really supporting and making sure that young women and women of older ages know that we are there to support you.
And you know, that idea of the connection as well, sort of bringing people together, making sure people feel that they have a support system.
That's right.
How do you see technology actually being a help and maybe a hindrance as well? I don't know. I mean, do you see it both ways?
I see it both ways. I think it's a help because you can connect to people in so many different ways. I see it as a hindrance because it obviates sometimes the need for people to actually have a face-to-face conversation. And back to your point of how are we going to end racism, I don't think that's going to happen on social media. I think that's going to happen with people talking face-to-face, really hashing out some of the hard conversations. That's why at the YWCA we have something called Stand Against Racism. It's actually going to be this year from March 28th to April 1st. And we'd love for people to join us in our efforts. It's a dialogue. It can be a dialogue, it can be a meeting, but we really want people to get involved and engaged and begin the discussion of race and how we can end racism.
The conversation around race as well, I mean, sort of going back to the Super Bowl a little bit, Beyonce obviously rocked her little socks off.
She did.
Like, that was amazing. What did you think?
She always does.
Well, totally true. But so people have been, you know, looking at formation, and it's interesting how people have been interpreting it, right?
Right.
How do you see the video? What did you kind of take away from that moment?
Well, it's interesting. I think people try to racialize everything. They talked about Coldplay and how they weren't like standing out, and Beyonce took the stage and she was like, making herself more prominent. And then formation was compared to the Black Panther movement. Honestly, do we have to let's deal with race when race really exists, and let's don't create problems where there aren't any. There are plenty of problems. African Americans are not afforded the same opportunities as everyone to succeed. Let's deal with that. Let's don't deal with the Super Bowl halftime show. Let's deal with the real realities of achievement gap, the education gap, the political aspirations of people of color that are not being realized. Let's deal with the real issues, and then we can talk about the Super Bowl later.
That's fascinating, because I think that it seems like people are more comfortable talking about the sort of superficial conversations.
Yeah, but I'm not into that. I'm not. At the YWCA, we're real serious about trying to really come up with sustainable change and impact as it relates to race relations and sexism. And the Super Bowl, great, but not my reality.
It's not and I think that that's true. It's not the reality of so many women as well that obviously come to your organization.
No, and not people who live it every day, every single day. As a woman, and you look at me. You talked about my credentials. I mean, I'm a physician. I'm a CEO, and still I face challenges as a woman of color. Again, I don't let them impede me, but they are still there. So, as a woman and as a woman of color, those two things intersect, and it really could create a very, very daunting task for women to overcome. But I submit to you that, if we talk more about the realities of race, racism, and sexism, and really not just, and maybe even stop talking, maybe do something about it, I think the world will be a much better place all around.
In terms of doing something about it as well, one area I know that you're very passionate about is about gun violence as it pertains to domestic abuse. Tell us what you envisage, what you would hope that we see. It doesn't look like anything is going to get done in the next, 12 to 18 months, and we're going to have to get a new president in, I think, before anything is going to substantively change. But what would you want to see happen when it comes to gun violence?
Well, we want to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. The reality is a woman is much more likely to become a homicide victim if, in fact, her abuser has a gun. We have been advocating for that at the YWCA, and we will continue to do that because we don't think that a woman should lose her life because the perpetrator has a gun. It should be taken away. How
do you want to have that conversation, though? Because there have been so many sensitivities around guns, gun ownership. The conversation seems to be so hyper-partisan at the moment. What are you sort of hoping is going to actually thaw that out? Well,
as you know, we are a nonpartisan organization, and we're not trying to get into the whole issue or discussion around gun control. We're talking about someone who is known to be an abusive person, who has a record generally of abusive behavior. We think that person, should not have a gun. That's it. Simple.
It should be simple, but for some reason, I don't know why it doesn't seem that people want to actually take that on board and then think, okay, that's a no-brainer.
Well, and just like, women's equality and racial equality, for me, seem very simple, but still, it's an issue of power. It's an issue of people not really wanting to accept the reality that things must change. I mean, people are a little bit uncomfortable with change. But, again, I think it's one of those instances where people have to just decide to make a change. And that change can happen. I was at an event and there was a dais full of male CEOs. Many of them were Caucasian. And they were talking about, we need to make a change. We need to have more, more women of color in the positions. I wanted to run to the stage and say, go do it. Because you guys are the ones that can make those decisions. So there are many instances that we are making it appear that they're so huge, but they're really not that simple. It's if we can get beyond the fact that it's a power struggle, we can be real honest about the fact that change can happen, then I think we'll be able to move the needle.
I love that. It does drive me crazy as well. And they're like, we're having a focus group about this, and we're gonna, we got a task force all about getting more women involved. We're on it.
Yeah, just do it.
I don't know why they just don't do it. I think you're absolutely right. Well, as somebody who's in leadership and then also has to deal with so many of these aspects, we're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about gun violence, you're talking about racial discrimination. How do you stay positive? Because it can be so heavy, and obviously, not to at all diminish the real struggles that people have that actually utilize your services at all. But as somebody who carries all of that on their shoulders and then has to see results, wants to see results, what do you do to maintain your positivity?
Well, one thing, I go to the spa, but beyond going to the spa, it certainly doesn't help. It doesn't hurt, but no, really. I stay positive because I really feel like this is my purpose. I am very passionate about the work that I'm doing. Not so long ago, about 18 years ago, I was faced with a life-threatening illness. And after that, I made a decision that whatever time I have left on this earth, I'm going to use it to make a difference in the lives of others. So I do get frustrated, sometimes with the work, but the reality is we have made a lot of progress. Organizations like the YWCA and others have made a lot of progress, and I think we can continue to make progress. I'm not going to get stifled by a lack of optimism. I have to stay positive and focused, because I think one day, hopefully real soon, we will achieve our mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. But it's going to take all of us. It's going to take every one of us and all the resources we have.
Yeah, and actually, you sort of very quickly went over that like life-threatening illness moment. I mean, you breast cancer survivor.
Yeah.
It is quite amazing. I mean, you had to go through some terrible hardships yourself. How did you get yourself from a position of, sort of feeling like things were insurmountable to then this position of strength as you are today?
Well, I am certainly a woman of faith, but it's one of those things that I had my very private and unproductive pity party, as most people would. But after that, I realized, I really felt like I was given the opportunity to stay on this earth for a reason, and I was going to take advantage of it. And so that is driving me. It is motivating me. And, I think it was Winston Churchill who said that mountaintops inspire leaders, but valleys mature them. And let me tell you, that valley matured me in ways that were unimaginable and really made me realize that I no longer wanted just a regular job anymore. I needed to have a job where I can make a difference. And certainly the YWCA gives me that opportunity in spades.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dara, I mean, I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for coming on Huff Post Live. It's such a treat. Thank you very much.
It's really an honor. I certainly hope that people will go to our website, ywca.org, and join us in our efforts to eliminate racism and empower women.
Absolutely. And guys, you can do that. The links are in the resource well below this video player. For more information, as Dara just said, about the YWCA, you can check out those links below. And stick around, there's more Huff Post Live coming up next.